Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the Insider's Guide to Project Cars 2, where today we're going to be taking a look at the road cars in Project Cars 2, driving them effectively for good lap times and most importantly actually keeping them on the surface of the track, as quite a lot of people tend to struggle with road cars. Obviously Project Cars 2 is quite heavily motorsport focused, with a lot of racing cars available on offer in its driving roster. But there are also road cars as well, ranging from basically the low end like Toyota GT86, the old 1966 Ford Mustang, all the way through up to your really high performance modern hypercars such as your Ferrari LaFerrari, the McLaren P1 and obviously the Porsche 918 as well. And there's bits of everything in between, from all sorts of ages going all the way back to the 60s, 70s, all the way up through to obviously the modern era. Now we're going to kick off this episode by taking a look at the tyre types and basically help you guys out with that as to what kind of tyre types you should be using in the basically various different weather conditions. So we're actually in the Ferrari 288 GTO, basically just to show you some of the older tyre types that are available on offer, and then we'll actually hop over into a more modern car that we'll actually be driving and focusing on for this episode. So obviously, taking a look at the actual tyre compounds available, the automatic by weather option is obviously going to apply the best compound suited to the conditions that you are driving in. You then have a track option, which is essentially your kind of more modern high performance tyre, obviously suited to driving in track conditions. This will give you basically the best performance in terms of grip, turning levels, basically braking, and grip under acceleration, and will also be quite good for wet conditions as well, as long as you're not going through some of the heavier, more standing water that is around the circuit in those live track puddles. But just driving in general wet conditions on a wet surface track, you should be okay with the track tyre. Now the next option is a summer tyre. These summer tyres are kind of, again, another more modern performance option that is available on the car. However, these won't be as good as obviously the track tyre, as the track tyre is a lot more focused. This is obviously a lot more kind of biased more towards the type of tyres that you'll be driving in more road conditions. So these will probably be a little bit more suited for driving in wet conditions. You may not quite have the same amount of grip just driving on a wet surface as you would with the track tyre. However, it will handle aquaplaning a lot better. It'll be able to shift a lot more of that standing water, and there would be less aquaplaning with the summer tyre in comparison to the track tyre. Next up, you have the all-terrain tyre, just in case you want to go off-roading with the road car. You then got a winter tyre, which is obviously going to be suited more towards the cooler, a lot cooler conditions and driving in snowy conditions. You then have a nice tyre, just in case you wanted to go and start driving around on ice. And then we also have a club tyre, which is kind of a lot more around the standard of the tyre type that would have been fitted to the car if it came out of the factory back at the time that the car was available for sale and basically purchased. So these club tyres are going to be pretty poor, as tyre technology has come a very long way in recent years. So if you wanted a kind of a better understanding of what the car was kind of more accurately like to drive back at that time, especially driving it around the circuit, the club tyre, it will be a lot more representative of what the tyre was actually able to do in comparison to the track and summer tyres, which are a lot more kind of more modern technology focused. They'll have higher grip levels, will provide you with better cornering ability and also better braking. So coming over now to the McLaren 720S, this is the car that we are going to be driving for this episode and actually racing around the track and doing the various different driving techniques. Let's take a look at the more modern tyre types that are available for various cars. So obviously we've got the automatic by weather option again, which we have for all cars. We then have a modern Pirelli P0 Trofeo R tyre, which is effectively a soft compound tyre type. It's very heavily track focused. So it will provide you with quite a lot of grip, especially cornering ability, and then also braking as well. It won't have too many grooves on the tyre, and it's best suited for the dry conditions, but it can also handle the wet. However, stay away from the large live track puddles. The Trofeo R tyre that you have here, this handles aquaplaning really quite badly. It doesn't really shift all that much water, so if you go and hit a puddle with this tyre, the chance of you aquaplaning is going to be very, very high. However, just general driving around in wet conditions, you should be fine, and this is probably one of the better tyres to be driving in those kind of conditions. Next up, you have the Pirelli P0 Corsa tyre. Now, as you can see, this is a medium compound, and this is actually the tyre that you'll find on the OEM setup. If we quickly come out and load up the settles, obviously you've got the default, loose, and the stable setup. These are more track focused, so the car will be slightly more stiffer, a little bit more aggressive, and kind of set up for track conditions. However, the OEM setup here is actually set up and kind of more biased to how the car will actually feel if you were to drive it out of the car showroom and be driving around the track. And the default tyres that come on this setup are the Pirelli P0 Corsa tyres. Now, these aren't necessarily the exact tyres that are going to be fitted on the McLaren 720S if you were to go ahead and buy it. However, these are probably the better high performance tyres for general road use, but also some track use as well. So this tyre will give you a much better representation of what the car is going to be like to actually drive around the circuit. Now, the next tyre is the Pirelli P0. This is obviously a hard compound tyre, as shown in the brackets there. And then this essentially is, again, it's kind of even more road-based. There's a little bit more road standard. It's not quite as high performance as the P0 Corsa or the Trofeo R tyre, so it won't have the grip levels driving around the circuit. However, this P0 tyre and also the P0 Corsa tyre will handle aquaplaning a lot better than the Trofeo R. They may not have quite as good grip driving in general wet conditions. However, if there is a lot of standing water, I'd recommend driving on the P0 Corsa or the Pirelli P0 tyre, just to kind of reduce the amount of aquaplaning that you may see when you go ahead and hit a puddle. Next up, you have the all-terrain tyre, just in case you want to go rallycross driving, and then you got a snow Pirelli P Winter Carving Edge tyre for obviously driving in snowy conditions, and then you've got an ice tyre for driving on actual ice. So now we're actually going to go ahead and load up the loose setup, which is obviously a lot more track focused, and it's going to have the Pirelli P0 Trofeo R tyres, and we're actually going to talk about some of the driving techniques driving around the circuit as to what you should be doing with the road cars, because you do approach them differently to the race cars. Obviously, whilst this is a very high performance supercar, possibly even hypercar levels in the McLaren 720S, produces a lot of downforce and it's generally got very good performance for road car standards. It's not going to be up to the degree of a lot of the racing cars that are available for driving in Project Cars 2. You're not going to quite have the same amount of aerodynamic performance. It's not quite got the same amount of braking potential, and then the tyres don't quite have or produce the same amount of grip. You'll be pulling less G's through the corners. There's not going to be as much grip. However, this car also does have quite a bit more horsepower than those race cars as well, so I need to be very careful when it comes to getting on the throttle coming out the exit of the corners to avoid getting tons of oversteer like that. So everything needs to be so much more smoother, more precise, and a bit more marginal. Marginal, sorry. I was kind of almost saying marginally there. A bit more marginal in terms of what you're doing with your inputs, and you don't kind of rough and rag the car around the circuit as you would with a race car, because the speeds are so much higher. Like coming down this straight here, you've got the speed in kilometers per hour there behind the steering wheel, and down at the bottom right in the tachometer is in miles per hour. And approaching this corner here, 190 miles an hour, braking at pretty much the braking point where I would for the with say like a GT3 car or a GTE car, around the 150 meter board. We just completely sailed past the apex. It doesn't have anywhere near as much braking power as the race cars do, so you need to recalibrate your brain with the road cars. Brake much earlier, be much smoother with the braking as well. Same with the turning, going through the corner and then coming out the exit, to make sure that you actually keep it on or within the confines of the circuit. So the things that you should be doing when it comes to the braking is not doing that. Don't shift down into especially the lower gears just as you're turning into the corner, as it can be quite easy to lock up the rear axle, and that will give you a ton of oversteer going into the car, into the corner, sorry. It'll make the car become unbalanced, it'll lose the tyre grip, and it'll become a lot more twitchy and a lot more unpredictable. So you make sure that you do your braking in a straight line, or in a straight line as you possibly can. Likewise with your downshifts, make sure you do it early before you actually start to turn into the corner, to avoid that heavy turning oversteer as you shift down the gear. So let's try and demonstrate that coming into turn 1. So we accelerate down the straight now, heading up past the speeds of what you will achieve in a GT3 GTE cars. They're kind of around 170, 175 top speed, so 190. Onto the brakes, braking just below the ABS level, threshold braking, get it all done in a straight line. Turn in nice and smooth, balance the throttle through the apex, and as we come out of the corner, start to apply the throttle a little bit more. Then once we kind of got the car a lot more straight in the direction that we are wanting to go, and we're unwinding the wheel and we've got it almost dead straight, that is when you get full throttle. So coming through here, being nice and smooth, just balancing the car for optimum grip. Kind of it goes a little bit light over the crest. So braking in a straight line, I'm actually going to keep third gear this time. Coming into here, just a little bit too much throttle there. Start to rotate the car a little bit more on exit. I'm going to have to lift here because, well, there we go, that's why. That corner would quite easily be flat in a race car, but where I took a pretty poor line approaching that corner, it was very tight, and obviously we don't have the downforce or the grip levels from the tyres of those racing cars, ran out wide, and then once I caught the curb on the exit there, it ended up spinning the rear tyres and lost control of the car. So it is very different. It does feel almost pedestrian-like in comparison to the road cars, but when you actually look at some of the apex speeds that you're actually doing, it's actually pretty high for obviously road car standards. Like we're coming through here at like 50 miles an hour. General roads in and around the country are probably in and around 50 miles per hour as their speed limit. So although it does feel or look quite slow, it's not actually that slow in comparison to real world. So shifting down nice and again, getting the car into the apex, picking up the throttle nice and smooth, managing that tiny little bit of oversteer. Coming through here again, braking nice and smoothly, coming off, turning in, clipping the apex, balancing the throttle, and it sounded a little bit slow again, but when you actually look at the speeds, it was a good 80 to 85 miles an hour that we were actually carrying through that corner. Actually going to drop down into second gear this time. Now we'll go full throttle, and now we've actually got the car set up better this time around, coming through here to actually take it flat out. But again, we're going to need to brake early, brake smoothly, get the car slowed down, turn in nice and smooth. Don't wrestle the wheel to get the car turned into the corner, as that will just unsettle the car and it will likely end up in you spinning. If you're nice and smooth with the steering inputs, then once you come in to the apex, just balance the throttle a tiny little bit just to make the car squat slightly at the rear end and kind of get that nice neutral balance. That's when you'll get nice rotation through the corner. It'll set you quite nicely for coming out through the exit, and obviously you can bring the power on more as you progress through the corner and you start to unwind the wheel and get the car in a straight line. So I'll try and demonstrate with a quicker lap this time round. Coming in. So again, on the brakes, nice and smooth down through the gears, lifting off, make the apex, balance the throttle, get the car straight, then we can get full throttle. Car wanting to twitch slightly at the rear even though we've got traction control. Once again, nice and smooth through the apex. Running a tiny little bit of curb there. Just balancing the car through this corner, no heavy inputs or anything like that, just to keep the car nice and settled. Braking again in a straight line, getting the car turned in. A little bit of oversteer on the exit just to help us rotate through the corner a little bit. You can use the power to get that tiny little bit of oversteer on exit to help you rotate through the corner, but don't give it a massive bootful because you will get a bunch of understeer that comes with it initially and will bring the car out wide before getting quite a lot of oversteer, and the slip angles obviously may not be as high. It could be a lot more difficult to recover in comparison to a lot of the race cars. So again, just being nice and smooth. And then coming through the final corner, get it turned in, balance that throttle through the apex. And now we can get full throttle and accelerate out. Probably picked up the throttle a little bit too much initially, and that cost us a lot of time. But now coming down the straight, we should be in for kind of roughly a mid 42. Yeah, 42.6. So let's actually go ahead and restart the session and actually go and take a quick couple of laps with the OEM setup, because that was with the loose setup. So obviously a lot more track focus. There's going to be a lot more grip there in comparison to the OEM setup, which is kind of a lot more how the car would feel and drive coming out of the factory when you buy it cut off the car, out the car showroom. I was going to say off the shelf, but cars aren't typically stored on shelves, or certainly not these sort of cars. So with the OEM setup, it's obviously things are a lot softer, so we need to be even more progressive, and our tyres as well aren't quite up to the levels of the Trofeo R tyres that were on previously. We are on the P0 Corsa tyres. So although it's still quite a high performance tyre, it's not up to the performance levels of the Trofeo R, and you can see that I'm having to move the wheel around a fair bit more already in comparison to the Trofeo Rs. And if we brake at the point where we were braking previously with the Trofeo Rs, we do still make the corner, but we did also run deep. I probably could have braked a little bit more before actually turning in as well. Yeah, so the car is wanting to oversteer a lot more in comparison to the Trofeo Rs. So we're having to try and be a lot smoother, even more progressive. I'm doing a pretty bad job of actually driving a decent line at the moment around the circuit, so we shall focus properly when it comes to driving the next lap. So if we actually go ahead and brake at the same point that we were doing with the Trofeo R tyres and the default loose setup, so it was just after the pit wall ended, pretty much here that we were braking previously. Yeah, the car still wasn't quite slowed down enough to turn in, so we have to start braking even earlier. And we get even more oversteer coming out the exit there. Coming through, just about managed to get the car into the corner. Again, being nice and smooth. No heavy inputs with the steering wheel or with the throttle, just to make sure that the car is nicely balanced. However, it is going very light over that crest there, and we're starting to get a lot more oversteer. And again, it sounded horribly slow and pedestrian-like through there, but we're still doing a good 58 to 60 miles an hour through that corner. So it can be quite difficult to grab a sense of speed with the road cars, and even though it does feel and look slow, it may not actually be slow in terms of kind of real world performance, considering that this car is a very high performance car, and it's doing 60 odd miles an hour through some of the slower corners around this circuit, where even the national speed limit in the UK is 60 miles an hour on the national speed limit roads. Obviously 70 when it comes to the motorways and highways around the country. So taking a comparison with the lap times, it wasn't exactly the smoothest of laps, but we're already a good 3 seconds or so, and I braked way too late for this corner. 3 seconds or so slower than we were with the F.O.O.L R tyres. So there's definitely a performance loss here. However, like I said, when we were taking a look at the actual tyre compounds in the setup menu, this tyre will probably be better suited for driving in very, very wet conditions when there's a lot of standing water. You can see we get a massive understeer through here, although my line was pretty terrible. So nice and smooth, or trying to be. You can hear the tyres are on the limits of grip as we're doing 150 miles an hour through those two very shallow corners. It's an absolute breeze for pretty much any race car going through those two corners. It's just completely flat without a question, with barely any steering actually needed, and the tyres on this are squealing away. So coming in nice and smooth, getting the car up, tucked in and rotated. And we'll see if we can try and get a semi-decent lap as kind of a third and final flying lap for this, and we shall call the episode here. So, coming down the straights, similar sort of speeds, again hitting 180 miles an hour, coming out towards 190 miles an hour, braking in a nice straight line. Probably braked a little bit too soon there. Nice and smooth with the steering, balance the car on the throttle. Then once we've got the car kind of straight and we've unwound the steering wheel, that's when we can get hard on the power. Coming in, again braking nice and straight, turned in too late there and ended up going out wide. Nice and smooth through here, just balancing the throttle, watching for this crest coming out the exit here. And that time the car didn't go light, getting the car into the apex, using a little bit of the oversteer to help rotate the car through the corner, down through the gears, braking in a straight line, off in, throttle off into the corner, balance. There was that downshift as I was turning in. Coming into here. Nice and smooth once again. Then hard on the power to accelerate down the start-finish straight, and I think it's going to be pretty much another mid to high 45, judging by the delta over on the left hand side. So yeah, 45.6. So again, 3 seconds slower on that lap in comparison to the Trofeo R. But that is basically how you should be driving road cars. Be nice and smooth, progressive, do all your braking in a straight line. Once you got all your braking done, you got your car slowed down nicely, lift off the brake, turn in, and just let the car coast into the corner. Once you get in towards the apex, that's when you pick up the throttle a little bit, balance it nice and smoothly, and then you can get harder on the throttle as you progress, coming out through the corner and start to unwind the wheel more, and then you can get heavy on the accelerator once you got the car nice and straight. So that is a look into how to drive the road cars. Hopefully you guys learned something from that episode. If you did, give the video a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed the content. If you have any comments and questions, feel free to leave them down below. If you didn't really like the video, give it a dislike, give some constructive criticism that I can then apply for future episodes. And other than that, thank you very much for watching, guys. Hopefully I shall catch you very, very soon. But in the meantime, take care.